Hi, welcome. This is the second chapter, episode, whatever you want to call it, on balloon history, as I'm talking to various people from the past. So, not too long ago in that first episode, I spoke with Joseph Maar, the son of Hank Maar, who was probably the first balloon twister, or at the very least, the first person to really popularize balloon art. And there were a lot of questions and a lot of things that we were able to that have come since then, talking to people. And one of the great fascinations that I heard was people that are twisting balloons now interested in some of the techniques that were used during that time. Not because they were hard and forgotten, but probably because they were easy and forgotten. So, one of the things I hope to do today, talking to Joseph again, is bringing up some of those techniques and giving him an opportunity to share a little bit. And a quick note that I want to throw in: I'm not sure exactly at this point what he's going to share. Just know that if you go and use any of these old techniques, we'd love for you to share where it came from, that these were things developed by Hank Marr. And on that, I'm going to pass it over to Joseph.
Thanks so much. It's really an honor to be here and part of your community. My dad was born in 1921. By the late 20s, he was diagnosed with pleurisy, had to go to a TB sanitarium where they gave him balloons to exercise his lungs, and that's where he started twisting. The depression hits, and he hits the road as a kid, barely the age of 11 or 12. And in the early 1930s, really gets into magic, doesn't see balloons as its own thing, but was known significantly as a balloon magician. And if you take a look at some of the early brochures, this is where he's in his 20s, you can sort of see that he looks a lot like a magician, the way it's set up, much more theatrical. And you're moving from vaudeville to big bands and things of that nature. As things would continue, you start to then move to more of the clowning stuff. In fact, this is the earliest brochure we could find where he's Hank the Clown in the upper left corner, but he's still the balloon twister or doing balloon magic in the lower corner. And so that sort of progression really to clowning came around because an agent was willing to spend more money to get a clown on the show, and my father said, "Well, I'll do both." And so then it turned into Henry Marr, the Balloon Man, or some would call him the Sultan of Balloons. And then when he was doing his clown routine, particularly in this case for kids who are in a hospital, you can see where you've got the mixing of the clown and the balloons and going to see kids at various kinds of things that really replaced vaudeville in many ways. And as Larry has reminded me, nowadays you can't really take latex balloons into a hospital, but that's a lot of where some of this was popularized. This photo was actually in the Chicago Sun-Times in 1959. So part of the excitement around twisting was that you could take one balloon and do a whole bunch of different things. And I know that today a lot of artists will do that, but a lot of times it's really in making sort of this inanimate object. Here's an example of, a dog or of the space shuttle. Whereas my father really looked at balloons as something that could just do a myriad of different things, depending on if you put static on the balloons, how much you stretch the balloons. So I have a few old film clips that would, sort of, I'll share with you that sort of shows some of what that looks like to be somebody who isn't just thinking about the art of ballooning from a traditional making something, but is kind of thinking about it with a whole different routine in mind that comes out of vaudeville. And so, with that in mind, I'll share with you an old film that is from the in this case, 70s. He's got the clown suit on, but as you can see, he brings out same size balloon, right? All set up in different shapes. And if you watch the microphone stand, he's going to use static electricity to have some of the balloons just sitting there held up by the microphone stand, right? It had a functional purpose to it, but it also made it kind of fun that with static electricity, you could do things very differently. Um,
Now,
he was engaged. Go ahead.
if you don't mind me jumping in here, I want to say, before starting the clip, you made the comment about how one of the great things about twisting is the ability to take a single balloon and turn it into so many different things. And I'd love for you to comment on what we're seeing here is actually none of this being a single balloon being twisted at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so before the 2-inch balloons were around, he really was set up to perform in front of large audiences and stage shows. So here's an example of something like that. The balloons that he's using are larger and multiple balloons to create something, which is really the beginning of the art form. It wasn't one balloon is turned into many things because they were so large, other than maybe an apple. You couldn't really have one balloon turned into many things. What he did do that was kind of interesting, and this is a good example.
You're still
Four
sharing
balloons.
your screen.
Yeah, it's frozen because
Oh.
I want to show you four
Oh.
balloons are put together to make a rocket ship, right? And then you put another two inside, and all of a sudden it becomes an airplane. And then you put another balloon inside and it'll become a swan. And he blows it up backward. And I want to show you that backward blowing technique and how it becomes a swan. Because in some ways, the only way to really create this sort of multi-balloon but one size figure is to be able to do things differently that related to a large auditorium or group of kids. To blow something up backward, that's really kind of, again, that's one of those lost art items. And I'll show you a little bit of how that works, because it might be of some interest to the folks who really want to try that sort of technique and have never thought about it. Some of it certainly is that you can shape the balloon, but some of it is the fanfare, the spectacle of a balloon being blown up backward. No different than using static electricity to get it to hold on to the microphone stand. So I'm just going to take, this is a 350, but it could be any size balloon. And I'll stand up and show you a little bit. But one of the tricks is that when you hold the nipple of the balloon to open it up, you really want to stretch it out, right? You really want to stretch it out so much that you can get your airstream to go all the way to the bottom, and then you're going to start from the bottom up. The other thing is you'll see me step on it. One, that helps me stretch it. But two, it lets me do a certain amount of control, because you're going to see my head go down. And by going down, I get more air to the bottom. And then as it starts, I'm going to start to come up, and that's going to change the shape. And this will be the neck of a swan. So, in fact, I'll switch to a yellow, because some of his trademark signs of knowing it was his balloon work was certain colors, and he always used yellow for a swan neck. So first of all, it's a stretch. And, in the vaudeville era, you could say, don't milk it, right? Stretch it. Just enough that you can feel the tension of the balloon, right? You don't want to stretch it so much that you're kind of deforming it. And then what you're doing is when you step on it, and this is for, say something like a swan head, my foot is covering the entire edge of the balloon. I pull it up. Now, see how tightly I've pulled this? My hand is here. The nipple, though, hasn't been affected. I switch it to this hand. I grab one half of the nipple with one hand, one half with the other. And now I do that stretch of the opening. Okay. I'm going to actually, and this is my technique a little more than my dad. I used to put my tongue down to get a centering. He didn't need to put his tongue down, but I put my tongue down. And then you're going to watch as I get my tongue set, I'm going to bob down, get the air started, and come up. So I'm going to pause there for a minute. And it bulbed out a little bit differently because I paused. But you can sort of see that by bobbing down and pulling up, I'm able to start to narrow the stretch of the balloon to do something with it that ordinarily you'd need to sculpt it very differently. And you can already see how the shape is changing. So let me kind of complete it, and I can certainly do this more than one time if Dewey, you or others have questions. But it means that you can start to make objects out of a balloon that you normally would have to use multiple balloons to do. So that constant stream was important. And you can already see that this part is wider than that. Okay, now there's two ways to release it. I've got the air closed up. One is you can squeeze the balloon. I'm going to hold it tight here. You can squeeze the balloon as you lift your foot. That's what my dad would do. I learned that it was easier for me to lift my foot and then squeeze. So I'm going to lift it just to cheat to show you that's what it looks like. And then when you squeeze it, you're going to end up in a place where it is now, because of where my foot was, it's now changed the shape, right? And so that shape change, if you can slide your hand up, and as I twist the balloon, I'm squeezing this, I'm now accentuating that change in shape. So while this initially looks a little bit like nothing, the fact that I stretched it the way I did, I bobbed down, and now I just let out a little bit of air, turning it in on itself. When I release it, I've already sculpted a certain amount, and you can see where I'm at the beginning of the neck of a swan, depending on how much I want this to have a swan that bows down or not. And some might say, well, you just want to make it look artistic. Actually, the other part of this was because, as Dewey said, it was multiple balloons. It was also multiple balloons on a stage. Well, depending on what kind of stage show you wanted to do, or you were being asked to do, or what kind of performance, sometimes you'd need to let more air out, other times less. So if this was going to be at a company picnic or an outdoor location, you're going to let a lot of air out of the balloon, which means you can't bend it as much. The reason you get a lot of air out of it is it's less likely to break. Static electricity won't impact the balloon as much. Conversely, if you're indoors and it's going to be carried around by somebody, or it's going to be set down on the floor of a stage, you want it to really be a bit tighter, and then you can sculpt it a little bit more because it's a little bit tighter. So that's a great example of how the neck of the swan, and then you just twist this part here, and you've essentially got what you want. Can this be done other ways? Yeah, I've tried to do it, stretching my arms out. The truth is the distance between your foot and your mouth is no greater than any other distance you can get when you're standing up, right? You can't stretch your arms out far enough to your mouth. And so this is really one of those fun things that both allows you to sculpt it differently, but also is a bit of the showmanship that's different for somebody who's performing as a balloon twister, and they're not just focusing on making something, it's actually the process of making it that becomes a part of what's exciting. Finally, where you twist it here is going to be important if you're going to make it as part of a swan. So I'm pulling it up, and look at how much extra room I'm leaving. All right, and my father and I had different ways of tying things off, but I found this to be the most effective way for the swan, because I want a lot of room there so that when I put it into the body, this part can get twisted around the front and it holds more firmly. Again, these are things that were handed out. Even if it was on TV, it was given out to somebody in the audience. It was, big theaters that could have 10,000 people, circuses that might have, 12,000 people. You really needed to have something that was durable, and the head of the swan didn't just start to pop out on its own. I think the way the art has advanced itself with folks like Dewey and others is amazing. But it's kind of fun to show you things you can do that become not only what you're making, the process of while you make it becomes part of the entertainment for the person watching. And then what you do with your hands really has more to do with both crafting it. I wouldn't say that we're art designers, but also how durable it'll be when people are going to be taking it home or whatnot.
So I want to talk about the taking it home and all. Right now, what you run into so often, and this coming from somebody that I use balloons on stage. To me, it's really important to do the performance, and I always felt that you can entertain a lot more people if you have an auditorium full of kids or whatever, theater full of people watching you, than trying to hand out balloons in a line. But so often now we have this hey, give me one, I want to take it home. And you just said that was happening then too. But early on, the handing it out was more because, hey, you were a volunteer, you helped, or here's a special treat. Did you see early on a lot of that, hey, I need my own to go home with, or was it later?
You know, what a great question, dude. Um, my father incorporated that into the act because it clearly became part of what everybody wanted. And so, what he would do, and I'll try to share a piece of this from one of his performances, so that you can see how he would handle that, right? Because once you ended with the balloon backward, it was so exciting, everybody wanted it. So I'll try to resume where we were with the clip and show you kind of a great workaround that doesn't cost you a ton of your energy, breath, power, and time, that I'm pretty excited to show you relative to that question, right? So, um, so he would finish up with the swan that was, rocket airplane. This is blowing it backwards. He bobs down. He moves up. Now everybody wants it. So there's the neck. Oh my gosh, it's great. So he would spend some time going out into the audience and picking kids. This is in the 70s, and he was really big on getting a diverse group of kids to be a part of it. He also knew he handed things out. So who's going to take it with him? So he would make sure that he would have, this is in Kenosha, Wisconsin, so he could get different ethnicities based on who's in the audience. And he's handing every one of them a balloon and asking them to try to blow it up, right? And by doing that, he's actually handing out two things. One, his creations, but there's only a half dozen of those. Two, he's handing out just a balloon. And so in that case, and you could do this at that time, you could throw them to the audience, but you would be literally handing balloons out to people. And we'll get to the shooting in just a second. You'd be handing things out to people, and you'd maybe take, I don't know, 200 balloons that you'd hand out and ask people to try to blow them with you. Well, now you have a balloon to take home with you. And if it was 600 people, then you just would hand out 600 balloons. And it sounds a little chaotic, but if he didn't do that, the other thing, and I want to credit John Shirley, who also did this. I'm not saying either one of them invented it. I think about the same time they were both doing it. But he used to take huge hula hoops in the 50s and fill them with balloons and do a balloon barrage where he would just shoot them all out in the audience. And that way, from a time point of view, if everybody in the auditorium wanted a balloon, not going to be possible if you're on stage for 15 or 10 minutes. But if you can shoot out 80 balloons, there's a pretty good chance it's like catching a foul ball at a ball game. Now there's 80 foul balls, right? And so he would shoot the balloons out from these hula hoops and just kind of start to overhand push them, often with the kids on the stage as assistants. But it really became an exciting way to do it. And, candidly, we probably could have priced it differently, but he saw it as a great way to solve the problem of everybody wants a balloon. Here, let me give everybody a balloon, and now see if you can make your own balloon animals. And you know what? Any given show, somebody later would show up with something they twisted or did with one balloon. They thought they were doing something exceptional. And we always felt like, oh, dodge that bullet, right? How are we going to make 80 or 100 or 500 balloon animals? And instead, we just took several bags of balloons with us and passed it out to the people who were in attendance, and they got their own balloon that way. And because kids were on stage blowing it, which is something else I want to talk about in just a minute, it really kind of got through that question pretty effectively.
Yeah, see, I can't imagine giving balloons out for kids to inflate, because I've seen people try too hard. I've seen a couple of people actually pass out from trying too hard. The whole thought of having my audience blow up balloons that I gave them scares me a lot.
Oh gosh. Well, the good news is he did it for a few decades and he was okay. Now, it was maybe a different time, but I think if I had to do a show now, and I have not done one in decades, part of what you're doing is you're ending so quickly. It's not like people are staying around to blow it up. It's as they have to leave the door, right? So it's not like they're going to sit around for 10 minutes and try to create something.
Even worse, they walk out the door, you don't see them fall over.
There you go.
So,
so the other exciting thing that's part of this Get Your Own Balloon is what just started to show up. Again, if one of the things is to stretch it and blow it backward, or use static to put it on the microphone. The other thing is really shooting it and being able to shoot it in ways that you're controlling the flight. And that's, again, another lost item that I'd love to see some people experiment with in the future and really kind of make it their own to whatever degree they can. So I'll bring up a bit of a video or an old film clip to show you what it looked like in an auditorium. knowing that it really will work anywhere. Outdoors, we'll talk about in a minute, but let's just stay with indoors for the time being. Um, but what you'll see is a balloon that's going over the heads of the audience and then returning back to him. We would call it the boomerang. And some of it just looks pretty simple and straightforward, right? But look at all the kids that want something thrown to them. So it was another way to engage the audience and do something really, exciting and different. This is not done at all anymore. And before I go to Hare Arena, I'll talk to you a little bit about what that looks like from the point of view of if you want to get a balloon to go out and come back to you, especially if you're indoors. So one of the things is, and you can probably see as I'm pulling these balloons out, I want to pull one out that doesn't have a lot of kinks to it. I really want to pull one out that if it's not already straight, it feels like it's pretty close to straight. And this one I want to do quite a bit of stretching on. So I'm going to actually stretch it in each section. And you can pre-stretch these if you need to, okay? And then you're going to want to blow it a traditional way at the beginning. But your goal here is to try to have it as straight as possible as you're blowing it. So as you can see, I'm already starting to straighten it. So this is a typical, right? It's full, but again, we want this one to be one that returns to us, okay? So if I want it to return to me, I really have to pack it with air. So now it's super tight. You can actually see how much wider it is here. And depending on who you are and how you like to do it, I always put it under my arm. You have to be careful because your goal is to not put a lot of static electricity on the balloon. We'll talk in a minute about static. But if you can keep it tight so that when you release the nipple, you really have your finger here, right? And you're just pulling it up like that. Don't do anything else extra, because now this balloon is pretty darn tight. And all I'm going to do is just start to feel it. If you want to, you can look down the edge of it. But I'm just start to feel it to try to get it as straight as I possibly can be. The bottom part is more important than the top in terms of the boomerang effect. But what you're really trying to go for is to make sure that you can actually send it forward in a way that it will level off and then come back to you. And the way you do that is right at the bottom, a little bit of a twist, try to get that straight. And then once you've got a feel for how straight it might be, okay, it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. Different people, different fingers. My dad used the pointer finger. I use my middle. I go straight into the nipple. And I push and I grab. I'm trying to do this slowly for you. And then I start to twist right away. 1, 2, and now after 2 turns, half turns, now I'm doing it based on how tight the balloon feels, believe it or not, the temperature. So if it's really warm out, I don't want to go much further, this thing will pop. Believe it or not, if it's cold, you actually want to twist it a little bit more. All right, so at this point, this airship is now set up so that when I release it, it's going to be spinning. I'm also going to take my right hand and give it just a gentle push forward, about like that, not a lot. And this hand is going to guide it. And unfortunately, I'm not outdoors or in a big auditorium, but you'll get a feel for, and I'm not going to push it much so you see the spinning, you'll get a feel for the rotation that comes with it. And it fell back lower because I've got a ceiling that it hit. So that rotation is what you want to get. 1 turn, a second. Again, the turn is just a flick of a wrist. It's not a 360-degree turn. You can already see it's bent a little. And so now, if you're indoors, what you're trying to do is, and you got to practice with this, everybody, you're trying to maximize your velocity and the leveling off with the spin rate so that it'll level off and then come back to you. And that can be tricky, so you want to practice as much as you can. Also, is there air conditioning? Are there wires? Are there vents? What else is there? And as you do it, you can then start to see how the return comes at you. And you'll eventually get to the point where you're good enough that it looks like you've intentionally brought it right back at you. So that's a great way to do it when you're indoors. When you're outdoors, it's a bit trickier. And so usually when we were outdoors, we would walk while we were about to go shoot it, knowing that if it went very far and it was windy, it just became another balloon in the audience, and that was part of the routine. But if we were walking, in order for the balloon to come back to us, we're already walking. So we're going to meet where the balloon lands instead of it just coming right back to the same spot. It still feels and looks like a boomerang. The last part of what I want to talk about with shooting a balloon like this, that's got it's got the nipple tied tight, is that you can use static electricity as your friend. And that's a little bit more of a challenge. It's kind of more advanced. Again, these are fun things that nobody really is doing anymore. So I welcome anybody to start practicing and trying. But usually my dad would start to talk about something, and he would do this, and he knew what he was wearing. And as he was talking, he would be doing this, and you knew he was adding static electricity to the balloon. Outdoors, it's not going to matter darn near as much, other than the more static you can do outdoors, the more likely it's going to break when somebody touches it. So if you want a balloon to pop when somebody touches it, outdoors, get as much static as possible. Indoors, it's kind of a 50-50 as to whether or not it will pop or if it's going to stick somewhere. And that has to do with, believe it or not, how much hair you have on your arm and how much you can feel the static. So I can feel the static really well right now. If I go much further, it's going to get to the place where it will pop on somebody. But I know that this static is already at a place where it'll hold itself up, at least mostly, on a wall. So what you want to be able to do then is straighten it and get enough static that you can shoot it and have it, again, this is not a high wall, but have it land so that it ends up sticking on the wall. And that can be really fun, regardless of the size of the place you are, because now they see it shoot, and instead of it coming back to you, the last one that goes out lands and rests on a wall, or goes out and all of a sudden somebody touches it and it pops. Those are really fun things to do. And I know that's not the same artistry as a twister, but we just, he was called the balloon magician.
No, as you said, I mean, this is about entertaining with the balloons. It's not just making something. I love when that stuff happens. It never even dawned on me to try to control the static. I use it when it's there. Yeah, no, I use it when it's there. Usually, when I'm in a space, I'm concerned about reducing static. I've put out humidifiers to put more moisture in the air to get rid of the static. Really, it never dawned on me to try to do it on purpose.
Yeah, and we would actually separate the balloons out depending on the temperature of the day and what was happening. Hard times, we grew up in the Chicago area, and if we were doing a TV show, but the cars were the balloons were in the car in the cold, that was a really tough thing to control static, because now you've got super cold balloons. It could be 95 degrees or more in the studio, the heat of the lights. So static doesn't like big temperature changes for the balloons over a period of 2 to 3 hours. But as long as you can keep the temperature, more consistent by having the balloons with you in the house, and then you take them in the car, whatever you've got, then you'll start to get a feel for what static works for you, what static works against you, and then you can start to do it without tying off the balloon.
So when you talk about all the static in TV studios too, I want to point out, especially for the younger balloon twisters that have never twisted in a TV studio, in the old days, you couldn't avoid static. You couldn't eliminate the static because you had all of the CRT monitors all over the place that were just generating static constantly. So absolutely, learning how to control it and not pop on you was absolutely critical. Now, I was wondering. I mean, you're already talking about practicing for the your target. Get your aim better. For those that have not seen it, I wanted to point out too that was also something that I saw you doing with your dad was the target practice bit. You would hold up a target, just a round balloon. I think that's what you were using, or maybe hula hoops. Right. And, so another thing to do there, and that I've always been more willing to do with kids. If I was handing them a fully inflated balloon, I might show them how to shoot it and have target practice with them.
Yes.
And then was also wondering, you've made it very clear that at the time all you had were the 3-inch diameter balloons. That's what you're using now. Have you played with some of the same stuff with 2-inch balloons, 1-inch balloons, anything else out there?
Right. I have the smaller size because of the size of the human finger doesn't do as well. Right. So as soon as you go smaller than 2, it seems like your finger and your ability to get it to spin and torque, it's not as forgiving, right? Imagine a 2-inch balloon on your finger. It's going to spin so much. If you go to a 4-inch, you can actually pull it off, but they're more likely to get static and break because there's more surface area. So the 3, and part of it is a bias, but the 3 seems to be that sweet point in the middle where you can start to learn how to play with static and use it to your advantage. If you were stuck with 4s, you could do it. It just would be more likely to pop and not do as many things. The 4s, if you're outdoors or in an air-conditioned environment, a little bit harder because the wind's going to push it. Anything less than the 3, and you really don't have the ability to craft it the same way, at least for shooting and target. We did, however, have the balloon. We shoot at a target. We would switch to the 2s when those started to become popular as a second target, because the same target with the 2 looks smaller. Now, we also made it smaller, Dewey, so we didn't totally cheat. But I'll actually show you a clip. I don't have where we use the 2, but when we had to add time on a live broadcast, geez, we need you to go another 45 seconds, we would actually shoot through a target, and then we would change it, move the target back a little, switch to a 2, and it gave that impression, oh my gosh, that's really small. And as a credit, there was an old dog act called the Arwoods, and they used to have these beautiful poodles that they never would cut their hair because poodle was tiny. But after 5-6 years of hair growth, they looked huge, and they would put the poodles in different types of dog houses and things as part of balloon or dog entertainment and magic, and they looked like they were just these gigantic dogs, right? So my dad took the opposite effect and said, if I use a smaller balloon in target practice, well, I bet that could look like it's much more difficult. So the sound will be on in the background. This is 1978 in Chicago. TV show is called Bozo Circus, and after he's done the Swan, this is.
Hey, we're gonna have some fun out there.
Now, this one, he happened to shoot at a camera that's not live. So when you see it, it's going to go to a different camera.
Woo, that's a lot of breathe there. I heard someone way back there, one of those top rows, say, by golly, I'd like one of those. So for you sitting up straight over there, ready? Aim, fire! You weren't sitting up straight.
Okay, so Dewey's point here, they, on the Bozo Show, generally didn't want kids to have balloons. There were 2 things. One, if it ended up in the audience, it did, we were forgiven. But 2, the goal was, if you cannot have them all walk out with balloons, that would be better. And so Dad would try to aim it so that it would shoot itself away. The truth is, he had something set up either way, right? If it went to somebody, he could say something, and if not, it was, you're not sitting up straight. That was buying time. You can see I got the target set up while he was doing that.
You weren't sitting up straight. I'll tell you what, let's try it again.
So you can't really see closely, but I'm giving him time cues, and he knows he's got to stretch a little bit on time. So he's going to try a boomerang. The negative is, in a studio, there's all these lights. See,
Here we go. Everybody sitting up straight.
It's supposed to come back to him. It hits a light and stays there. That happened. He just made like it was part of the performance.
All right, you ready? Here we go.
So I'll pause it here to kind of get a feel. This is in a studio that does have a lot of air conditioning. We would go in before the show and the lights were on. We would practice it and make sure we knew where was best to stand. But we also really got a feel then for how the air conditioning was going before the lights were turned on. And then once the lights were turned on, we had a much easier way to get a sense of what was about to happen here. what I think is kind of exciting is when you see it take off, you can see how it could still go into a smaller target further away. When I knew we didn't have time to do both, I would just move closer to the audience so there was a payoff. And that's, that's kind of the way that you can use a balloon to shoot through a target, or to do something a little bit more extravagant. I'll show a clip in a minute of what it looks like when you have a huge audience. You're in a circus, an auditorium, where we would actually shoot it at people. If a woman opened her purse, we'd try to get it into her purse. You can get pretty good at this part of the art if you practice enough, and if you have the right kind of repeat audience, meaning, gosh, I'm going to be on TV a lot. Oh, gosh, I'm going to be at a picnic a lot. Oh, hey, you know what? It's really going to be a lot of auditorium type things like a circus. Each of those have their own unique settings. And if you want, I can probably, Larry, just show a clip of what it looks like to set up in a circus.
Sure.
Okay. So this is in Dayton, Ohio at the Hara Arena. And it's the 1970s. A group the next day or at the end of the week was going to be performing a brand new group called REO Speedwagon. And this gives you a little bit of a sense of what it would be like to work on a circus where you've got to do balloons. There was no place to put it within the circus itself, so we were really what was happening before the spec or the walk around. Oops. And so while people were setting things up, we would walk around to see where are the wires, where are the obstacles, what are the things that are going to get in the way, and where can we entertain the audience. Because you've got to entertain on all four sides, which is really hard. Even though my dad and I were together, it's still hard to entertain people on four sides. And then you're looking where all the guide wires are set up. And yes, it's a circus that went from town to town, but every arena is a little bit different. And so in each location, we would try to spot where we could be that we wouldn't run into some sort of a wire. There's me at the ripe old age of about, I think, 9 years old, learning how to do the same thing. And so from here, you'll start to see what we would do with the balloon when we're in an indoor arena. There is a crowd, and we figured out how to do a lot of flight control based on a walk around. Just a real quick shot of Clown Alley, by the way. These are the clowns that would bring their own round balloons, and we're stunned to see somebody doing something with it other than just running around and clowning. There's a TV crew that's there, Channel 22, I think, that was doing a special on these people that came to town that had balloons and were making things into it and shooting it into the audience. Other than that, the clowns were really what you would think, how you can do something silly with your hat. And so this is the same technique. Look at how much he's twisting it. This time he doesn't push it much because he's trying to get it inside that vendor's stash of other things. So nobody necessarily knows whether you're tying it off or not. See, the angle's higher. That higher angle allows it to be more of a boomerang. It didn't level off as much there, but I remember that being a day when we had a lot of air conditioning. And, you can start to have fun with it. That's me learning the craft. And it really became a neat way to engage the audience and still do all four sides. You can see how much more I'm twisting it around my fingers. See, I'm much more kind of the person that has to figure out how I want to get it to a further distance by twisting it more often. And then the circus would start from there. So that's kind of some of the fun stuff that I would love to see folks do, whether it's blowing it backward, using multiple balloons, but creating one thing, a second, a third, a fourth, or starting to do things like shooting it out to the audience or having it level, using static as your friend, all of those different things. We could go on and on and on about, watching somebody who has long earrings or somebody who has all the rings on their hand, right? Because they're going to be more likely to pop a balloon than somebody who doesn't. So you start to pick out who will do what if they happen to catch or touch it. And that can be part of the fun of the entertainment process.
So where do you think your dad would have taken this next? He was constructing things in front of the audience as part of the show, like you're talking about. He was shooting the balloons. Did you see, because he was an entertainer before the balloons became a big thing. He was that magician. Yeah. where do you, because we talked last time, I think, about some of the other people that came after him and what they did. Do you
Right.
think your dad had kind of more or less settled down in what he was doing and that was good and comfortable, and he would have continued, or do you think he would have gone created more elaborate shows? Or
Yeah. Larry, thanks. And I know I called you Dewey a couple times. My apologies.
although I've got
Uh,
to say that's a compliment, to be confused with one of the most innovative balloon twisters that there was for many years. I'm not going to complain about that. But
Fair
go on.
enough. What a great question. Right before he passed away, he had done a few things. He had moved into face painting, kind of one of the first vaudeville people to move into that in the 60s and 70s, really as a way to sort of age gracefully and not have to do as many balloons. But his thought was not where the industry's gone today. As you can see by the designs, they're charming, but they're nowhere near as beautiful as what you and your wife do, and I've seen other people do. He didn't have that industrial arts and design background. He did have the showmanship background, and he was really big on Cirque du Soleil. And in the 90s, I actually wrote something to Cirque. They were kind of just coming of age. They'd done, I think, 2 shows. He sort of wanted to see what would happen if you took what he was doing and moved it into a Cirque du Soleil type of performance, where it isn't just what the clowns are doing, but somebody on stage with a certain type of dramatic music or thematic music is doing things with the balloon where it does land and hold, or it does spin and do something around a corner. And I think that performance art of balloon, it isn't really twisting at that point, right? You're twisting it a little on your finger,
Right.
but for the most part, it's one balloon, and you're really trying to do a different kind of performance art where you're engaging with the audience depending on who that audience is and where they're located. I think that he also felt like you could mix, as Cirque du Soleil does, certain types of other performances in with what balloons were doing. Carl Wallenda was a good friend of his, and he used to always joke about, "Hey, are you ever gonna when Wallenda's ever gonna do balloons up on the high wire, right?" But you see that circus sort of found a way to merge 2 different types of traditional circus into something new, and I would love to see that come back at some point, which is the art of twisting or live twisting merged with either a cirque or something else going on that feels really modern. But I think for that to be done right, it probably is going to be somebody who's a little bit younger, up and coming, and understands maybe dance, performance art, right? We're just trying to walk up and down the stage so the boomerang comes back to us. We weren't singers, we weren't dancers or any of that. And I think it's amazing that the industry went really 2 huge directions in the 70s and 80s. One was single balloon, long, skinny, twisted, and then the second was what you see Larry and his wife and others doing, which is just beautiful sculptures. I mean, unbelievable fine art at a level that my dad would never have really conceived of. I think he'd be blown away by that. I think the other interesting part is that the engagement with the audience, again, I'll go with the Cirque du Soleil, really can translate between different cultures. And so we were just starting, as he was ending his career, to figure out, what does this look like with a different country or something more international in mind? Because the idea of interpersonal space is different in different countries. So to have a balloon hit you in the face in one country is going to be really different than another. And so we did talk a little bit about, wow, if this ever became much more accepted internationally, you'd have to do something more interactive, maybe on the stage, bring people up than just randomly people in the audience. Because the audience part, it's like catching a foul ball. Who doesn't go to a baseball game and either want the ball or a home run ball or watch where it goes, right? Every time there's a foul ball, you're watching to see who gets it. So that part of the excitement, I think, could be where things go. And if anybody's engaged in Cirque-like skills or performance art, you might want to consider mixing this in. I'll be honest, he made it look really easy. I practiced for years. It does take a long time to get used to how much static, how tight, how windy is it? Because what people are going to want is consistency. They don't want you to show up at another place and you can't do what you just did because, oh, this is the ceiling's too
That's
high. Oh, there's too many wires.
as an entertainer, that's actually one of the biggest problems I've run into is people calling and saying, you've come to my school a dozen times, and this year I've run into this several times where I've shown up at a school and the school was under construction, the auditorium was under construction, and they said we've set you up outside, and we see it every year. We know you can do this. Like, yeah, I don't know. But you touched on a whole bunch of things in there that I think are definitely worth exploring. Certainly my work and others, and I mean, there's so many people doing those things now. Yes, people love watching things being constructed. It's like going to a mall where there's an ice sculptor or a sand artist or a balloon artist constructing something really large. People will stop and look and walk on, shop, come back to see the progress. That's one method of entertaining through the big construction, and another one is building out those stage shows and realizing that the balloon is just a prop like anything else, and we can all play and learn from all of that. So I don't know if you had any other final comments.
I did have one other, so I cheated a little when Larry asked about, was it all just one size balloon? It was, but for a brief period of time, Ashland/Pioneer Rubber made what was called an alligator balloon. Very few people knew about it. And we would use it early on in the act, one, so that it wouldn't give away what it was, and two, because we knew that it was really hard for other acts to duplicate something if a very rare kind of balloon was used. I don't know how my dad's arrangement was, that he was the main person that had these, but I want to show you what an alligator balloon looks like. It actually looks a little bit like the shape of an alligator. These don't exist anymore. I mean, I've got some old ones that'll just pop the minute I try to blow them up.
We still have clown balloons today, clowns and I can't even think of what other shapes. There are a few. Hearts are a big one now.
Right. And so what was neat about the alligator was it essentially was a wide body, thin neck, big head, spiky nose, but there were imprinted eyes in the balloon itself, kind of a recessed piece of it. And so you're just going to unfortunately have to watch. I'm explaining what he's doing, but this is an alligator balloon. And if you notice, he's stretching it in a certain way to not give away where his left hand is separating the wide part from the thin part, and his fingers are on where the eyes will be. So if there's somebody trying to duplicate him, they think he's actually pressing hard enough to create eyes out of it.
You know what else we didn't talk about is that these are all blown up by mouth.
Right. Yeah, we never had a pump. Never had a pump. I don't know if it just wasn't around or it wasn't affordable or it wasn't practical, but yeah, we blew up. I remember company picnics where I would be over 200 balloons blowing my mouth. And when those were the 2-inch ones, it was crazy. And so now with his left hand, he's squeezing where the eyes are, but those are already imprinted. And again, you'll see what it looks like when it's blown up. He's twisting it a little, but for the most part, this is close to the shape of a balloon that doesn't exist. So part of his trick there, when he's letting it fly out, he's about to make an elephant. The elephant requires so many twists, particularly with the wider part, that you had to let a lot of air out. And so by doing the woo, he was actually also letting air out so that, again, it would be really hard to duplicate this kind of item. He would then put the back legs on. And again, as part of the performance, he didn't know what he was making. He could never come up with, what is this thing? So he would say that it was something that was scaring him, right? Okay, that's one where he had used static to put behind him, but he didn't have enough static. Remember I said I did a lot more static than he did. And because of the temperature change of the balloon, it didn't stay on the back of his suit coat. Otherwise, what's supposed to happen is he turns around, can't find the balloon, and the audience sees that by static electricity, it's actually stuck to the back of him. Again, that sounds like something a clown would do, but you got to imagine when you're back in the 30s, it's magic. Wow, this balloon is sticking to the back side of this person, and it becomes part of what's fun with vaudeville. okay, that's the hardest twist we would ever have to do, and that goes to the something that's wider than 3 inches. You can see why he left a lot of air out.
Friend of ours from the circus. A little seal. There we go. Say.
And you know what he found
Change
was
the seal.
that he could have the music change to designate it's a different animal or you're moving on in the performance.
Oh, here we go.
So you hear the drum go down, and now a new song will start up.
You'll notice one thing. These are ordinary toy balloons, so you must handle them gently, carefully, with dexterity. Here we go. We get whoop. Now I know that everybody here loves to go to the Shrine Circus, and of course, with red and nice little yellow balloons. Why, we come up with the pachyderm mammal of circusdom, our one and only Dumbo, the old elephant, and there's Dumbo. By the way, I passed this out to some boy or girl who was sitting up the straightest.
So thank you for watching. Joseph, thank you for sharing all of that. I love getting the insights about the history and the stuff that I missed. And I'm looking really forward to more conversations. I'd like to cover more history with other people that have been around, that have been doing this for many years. And, you know, as time permits, I'll certainly share more of them. So again, thank you so much, and we'll see you later.
Thanks, everybody.